Hello, my name is Marq de Villiers, and I'm here to tell you something that you already know perfectly well, which is that the state of the world's water is not very good. And to do this, to illustrate this a bit, I want to tell you a brief story and then leave you with a question at the end. The story is this. In the year 2000, I traveled north from the town of Agadez in Niger towards the Algerian town of Tamanrasset. At an oasis along the way, the small pond of water, which was by that time the only source of water in the oasis because their only well had temporarily filled in, the well was contaminated by the corpse of a camel. It was half in and half out of the water, and it had clearly been there for some time because it was decomposing, and the water around it was a kind of slimy green in color and bits of reddish camel dung. Nobody knew, nobody had taken this camel out of the water because nobody knew whose camel it was. And to mess with a man's camel in the Sahara was a serious matter. So prudent travelers that week dipped their water skins into the water of the pond as far away from the dead camel as they could. Others, perhaps inured to the stench on the site, simply filled their water skins and went on their way. When I got back home to Canada, I would tell groups of people the story of this animal, and they were uniformly appalled. If the water was making these people sick, why didn't they do something about it? What was wrong with these people? So in the end, listening to these reactions, the incident transformed itself in my mind from a story into a parable, the parable of the dead camel. So I would tell audiences of some other things that I had found on my travels, dead camels of their sort, only much larger and much more deadly. Our own planetary dead camels, if you like. For everywhere you looked, what we as a species are doing to our water resources more and more resembles the carelessness and contempt for safety exhibited by those Tuareg nomads of the deep desert. I can't possibly give you a complete rundown of all the problems that the water faces. It would take the remaining time for all the rest of the speakers here, and you'd all be bored. But let me give you a few small examples. 4 out of 5 humans now live in areas where river waters are seriously polluted. Only a small handful of the world's major rivers are any longer fit to drink without chemical intervention. In China, more than half the rivers have disappeared altogether, and of the surviving waterways, most of them are completely polluted. The Yellow River is so bad that its water cannot even be used for irrigation. By China's own estimate, 280 million Chinese are forced to drink contaminated water every day. In Latin America and Africa, less than 2% of human waste is treated. Nor is the developed world exempt. The Rhine, for example, though it's much cleaner than it was a short while ago, a few decades ago, is still called the sewer of Europe for good reason. The Danube, while also much cleaner than it used to be, due to a very significant concerted international effort, nevertheless dumps 80 million tons of contaminated sediment into the Black Sea every year. The American Great Lakes, you will be hearing more from people who know more about them than I do. And they're cleaner than they were also a short while ago, but they're nowhere near as clean as they should be. There are still 250 million new cases of waterborne diseases every year, killing the equivalent of Canada every 2 or 3 years. A child still dies from drinking contaminated water every 8 seconds somewhere on the planet. Malaria still kills 1 million people a year. Even in Europe, 40 children a day are dying of diarrhea from drinking contaminated water. Dead camels. There have been efforts to get them out of the water, but there they still are. As for the supply issue of water, the other international problem facing our water supplies, there's plenty of fresh water on the planet. There's enough fresh water on the planet for everybody. There's an ample allocation. The problem, as Dr. Joe mentioned earlier, that it's often in the wrong places, at the wrong times, in the wrong amounts. I'm sure you probably know the hydrological cliche, God made the water but forgot to lay the pipes. So the problems remain and are getting worse. The United Nations and the US security apparatus, two bodies that don't usually see eye to eye, both agree that by 2020, some 3 billion people on the planet will live in a country without sufficient water to meet basic needs, the kind of needs that the ancient Romans took for granted every day. Rivers everywhere are drying up. The Jordan is little more than a trickle. The Tigris-Euphrates system is diminishing rapidly. The Colorado, as you know, has been basically stolen from the Mexicans and is no more than a drainage ditch by the time it crosses the border. Everywhere you look, water tables are dropping dramatically. In the Punjab in Bangladesh, water tables are dropping about 1 meter a year. In Beijing and around northern China, it's dropping even faster, and water is now being diverted from agriculture to industry in the cities. The Chinese are planning to attempt to re-engineer the entire country to solve the problem. No one expects this to work. In North America, it's no secret that the Southwest is facing an imminent crisis. Much of the Southwest is dependent on the Colorado and the Ogallala Aquifer. And as I said, by the time the Colorado gets to Mexico, it's virtually gone. Colorado reservoirs are dropping fast. California is in the 3rd year of its second drought in 20 years, and towns are beginning to ration water. More dead camels, you see. There's no shortage, alas. Two other issues complicate this already complicated picture. The first is the question of human population, or what you can call global swarming. The rate of population increase is slowing, fortunately, but there will still be better than 9 billion people on the planet by mid-century. We're adding the equivalent of a Britain to the population every year. In Egypt, a country where it never rains and it has only one river, there are 1 million new Egyptians every 9 months. And so the number of people that will be born between now and 2050 exceed the total population of the planet in the year I was born. That's how fast it's changing. There are so many people that ordinary human actions are having serious pollution effects. For example, tons and tons of suntan oil is a serious pollutant in the northern Mediterranean beaches of Saint-Tropez and Cannes, causing wildlife die-offs in the area. And then this is the one that got to me. Human dandruff has been found in high-altitude stratospheric aerosols. There are so many of us. It has been plausibly argued that just to feed the number of people who will be born between now and 2050, we will need the water from the equivalent of 20 new Nile rivers or 50 Colorado rivers. It's not clear where this water will be found. The second issue, of course, is climate change. As the temperature rises, more water is evaporated, and therefore more water falls to the ground. So it's easy to make the assumption that the water supply issue is going to get better. Not so. It's now clear that as the climate changes, already dry areas will become drier, and already wet areas will become wetter. The only argument until recently was whether the extra precipitation will drop as a steady drizzle in cloudy days, or whether it will come in very serious downpours. The answer to that question is now in. Catastrophic flooding will become the new norm. So let me leave you then with this question. We know all these dead camels are in our waters. We know they are poisoning us. So why don't we drag them out of the pond? To use the same formulation my audiences used when hearing about my Saharan camel, what is wrong with these people? Thank you.